Okay, little reminder here is that we're actually going to finish up plants in class. So in the next class, we will finish plants. So I know that this kind of makes this a little disjointed, but the benefit of this is that we'll finish everything up, and whether you're in class or not, you've got everything done, and then you'll have like a week to study. So regardless of how that works, we're a little out of order, but it's going to mean that we'll get it all finished up. So I think this is going to work better. Just kind of hang in there with me that we're going to switch in between plants and fungi. So the plants will cover kind of how they respond to their environment. So we'll kind of finish that up and then kind of get these guys as a whole as their separate thing. Okay, so we need to know a few things about fungi. We need an essential question. Our essential question is, what are fungi? And fungi is actually, or fungi is the plural term for that. Fungus is the singular. So what are fungi? And then we also want to know, how are fungi classified? There's another video where we have to classify some stuff. Oh, that's what happens in this semester. We got to classify things. Okay, so fungi, what are they? They are heterotrophic. So we should know the words. Hetero is different, trophic is nourishment, so they're going to get their nourishment from different places. They also are eukaryotes, so they have a nucleus. Okay, so this, because we're heterotrophic eukaryotes as well, this makes us a little bit more related to fungi than we would be plants, or plants are less related to fungi than fungi are related to us. That makes sense. So we're closer related to these guys. They, however, will secrete powerful enzymes to digest their food externally. So unlike us, where we digest everything internally, they do it on the outside, and then they'll acquire those nutrients by absorption. So they'll just like squeeze out enzymes and break it all down, and then just, sop it all back up. So most fungi consist of a mass of thread-like hyphae, making up the mycelium. Okay, so these are some new terms, hyphae and mycelium, but usually when you see MYC, we'll know that we're going to deal with the fungi. So in most fungi, the hyphae consist of these chains of cells separated by these little cross walls, and they have these big pores in them that are large enough to allow ribosomes and mitochondria and nuclei to flow from cell to cell. So it's kind of like a chain of cells where there's like, I want to say like openings large enough. Let's see if I can sort of make it, but like, sort of like, we've got a chain of cells, but these are holes, so if we wanted to have a whole nucleus go through it, it totally could, and then there would be a couple of nuclei in that particular one. So they have these like openings that different things can go through them, so it's kind of like an open tube. That's what a hyphae is, more like a tube. And that's sort of what they look like. They're kind of hair-like, and it almost sort of reminds you of like roots, but they're just not quite. Okay. So here's what they would look like. Like I said, it sort of looks like root, but you would find these hyphae, all of these like little threads, you'd find them all throughout what we call the fruiting body. Okay, this guy's the fruiting body, but you also find them underground. And so that whole mass of hyphae together is what we call a mycelium. Okay, so all little hair-like structures together is the mycelium. So fungal hyphae are surrounded by a cell wall, and you might think like, oh, this totally makes that like a plant. Oh, now I'm confused. But this is the thing, this is the real kicker here, is that the cell wall is made of chitin, not cellulose. So cellulose is the sugar that makes up the cell wall of plants, but chitin makes up the cell wall of fungi. And just for interest's sake, is that the whole exoskeletons of insects and arthropods are made of chitin. So again, this is another factor that sort of starts to lead us to believe that fungi are closer related to animals than they are plants. All right. Some fungi are also parasites, so they obtain their nutrients at the expense of the living plants or animals. And that happens. You can think like the quiz, the ergot. Okay. We also have mycorrhizae. So again, myco, we know it's fungal related. This is actually a symbiotic relationship between fungi and plant roots. So these guys can absorb phosphorus and other essential materials from the soil and make them available to the plant. So they can. There we go. So they form this kind of symbiotic, this is like a mutualistic relationship. They're going to get phosphorus and other things for the plant. The plant will actually give them sugars and water. So sugars produced by the plant through photosynthesis help nourish the fungus, making the relationship mutually beneficial. Yay! This is a win-win. We'll talk about this more at the end of our kind of units here before the STAR test. So fungal reproduction typically involves the release of a vast number of haploid spores. So that we should already know, which are transported easily over great distances by wind or water. So this is another spore-producing thing. A spore that lands in a moist place where food is available will then germinate, sort of like a plant, and produce a new haploid fungus by mitosis. It should start to sound familiar because this is sort of like a gametophyte. Okay, spores, however, can be produced either sexually or asexually. So we'll kind of look at that. And we're not going to get into too many details because this one gets nutty. But the idea here is that this is a lot like what we know with alternation of generations. Okay. So there's a lot like alternation of generations. So what we might have is if we had like, they want us to start over here. But let's say we had fusion, that you can do this, fusion of cytoplasm. So they have heterokaryotic. Karya means like, it means nucleus, like kernel nucleus. So it's like different nuclei. Too much. At some point, those nuclei will fuse, we'll get a zygote, and we'll undergo meiosis to produce spores, just like we did before, 2N to 1N. But then it can do two routes. So the spores can undergo mitosis basically for asexual reproduction and germinate, or they could fuse with other kind of spores. It gets real weird in there. So it's weird. We're not going to go over all that much detail, but the point is that this is a lot similar to plants. So again, our fungi are kind of in between on the whole plant and animal business. Okay. So fungi produce spores in both asexual and sexual life cycles. So imperfect fungi use only asexual reproduction for spore production, and they include many species of molds and yeast. So the yeast that we know are imperfect fungi. A mold is a rapidly growing fungus that produces asexually by producing spores, and a yeast refers to any single-celled fungus, okay, which we often use to make, really breads and cheeses and beers and things. Okay, so there are over 100,000 described species of fungi, so these guys are relatively diverse. But it's suspected, though not described species, may number as much as 1.5 million. So there's kind of like an opening in fungi to study those. I mean, I knew a mycologist, like a dude who actually studied fungi. I learned a lot about fungi that year. Not that I wanted to, but I learned it, okay? So the lineages that gave rise to fungi and animals are thought to have diverged from a flagellated unicorn ancestor about 1 billion years ago. So just to remember, a protist, that's a protist. That's one of our grab bags of things that didn't fit in other stuff. A unicorn is a protist. So the oldest undisputed fossils of fungi, however, are only about 460 million years old. Again, it's got to stand up to being fossilized. I'm yawning a lot tonight. I don't promise. All right. Although a current hypothesis of fungal phylogeny has multiple lines leading to the chytrids and the zygomycetes, indicate these groups are probably not monophyletic. They're not actually nice little groupings. The classification still identifies 5 main groups of fungi. So we're going to talk about 5 main groups of fungi. And we're at about the 9-minute mark. I'll show you what they are, and then we'll take a little break. But we've got chytrids, zygomycetes, glomeromycetes. Yeah, there's a lot of words here. Ascomycetes and basidiomycetes. Okay, so this would be a good time. Take a break, pause the video, and then come back. And let's might do this. Let's do this. So we need an Easter egg, and there's lots of things to do here. So as we go along here on a separate sheet, write our different types. We've already got those guys, and then give an example. Ta-da. All right, so chytrids. These are the only fungi with flagellated spores. Okay, so their little spores have flagella. They're thought to represent the earliest lineage of fungi. These guys are common in lakes, ponds, and soils, and are really linked to the widespread decline of amphibian species. So these are kind of our earliest lineage. Yeah. I know we don't really have an example there, but you can, if we're missing an example, do a description. All right, zygomycetes. So these are what we call zygote fungi. They're characterized by a protective zygosporangium, where the zygotes produce haploid spores by meiosis, which we know that's how that works. This is a diverse group of fast-growing molds, and these are the ones that attack bread, peaches, strawberries, sweet potatoes, maybe even some animals. So these are kind of the moldy things that we find. So like bread mold's a good example. Okay, so here's, I think here's some zygomycetes there on a bread. Sad. Glomeromycetes are our next one. These are a distinct type of mycorrhizae, so these are going to be that kind of mutualistic relationship with a plant. But the hyphae that invade the plant root branch are tree-like structures known as arbuscles. So arb is really referring to tree, so they're trying to give us some tree-like structures. About 80% of plants that have symbiotic partnerships with glomeromycetes will deliver phosphate and other minerals to the plant while receiving organic nutrients in exchange. Okay, so a lot of plants have this kind of a partnership. So these are our mycorrhizae. These are our good symbiotic relationships. And it works well because like 80% of plants tend to do this. And here's sort of what it looks like. So notice we've got, like, if you flipped them upside down, it would look like a cute little tree. So we call them arbuscles because they're in little cells. Okay. Our next one are ascomycetes. So asco are like sacs. So these are sac fungi. They form sac-like structures called asci that produce spores in sexual reproduction. So they live in marine, freshwater, terrestrial habitats and range from unicellular yeasts to elaborate morels and cup fungi. Some ascomycetes live with green algae or cyanobacteria, and we call those guys lichens. So that's where we're getting at. Remember those lichens that we thought maybe they were a type of plant, but they're definitely not. It's really an algae or cyanobacteria association with a fungi. Okay, so here's some cool edible morels that are a sac fungi, and we get these really cool cup fungi that are also in this category of ascomycetes. Our last one are actually probably the most common are basidiomycetes or club fungi. And they include our common mushrooms, puffballs, and shelf fungi. They're named because they have a club-shaped spore-producing thing called a basidium. And these fungi include important forest decomposers and particularly destructive plant parasites called rusts and smuts. So we've got some plant parasites as well. All right, so mushrooms, puffballs, shelf fungi are all in the basidiomycetes, and then some other ones will make some sense out of it. So fungi, I'm going to connect these things, lots of ecological or interacting benefits. But fungi supply essential nutrients to plants through symbiotic mycorrhizae. Along with prokaryotes are essential decomposers in the ecosystem, breaking down organic material, or just things that contain carbon, and restocking the environment with vital nutrients essential for plant growth. They're also used to digest petroleum products and the cleanup of oil spills and other chemical messes. So they do a lot of good work. All right, so there's some working to clean some stuff up. So fungi also have practical uses for humans. So we eat mushrooms and cheeses that are modified by fungi. Yeast help produce alcohol and give bread that kind of rise the rise to bread. Some fungi provide antibiotics that we use to treat bacterial diseases. Fungi figure prominently into molecular biology and biotechnology. Yeast, for example, are often used to study the molecular genetics of eukaryotes because they're pretty easy. Fungi might play a major role in the future production of biofuels from plants too. So just to kind of look at some of those things, but that's blue cheese. Blue cheese is made from a fungus. Delicious blue cheese. Also, they figured this out by bread mold. They put it here, and then they noticed around the bread mold, this Staph aureus would not grow. So they noticed this whole zone of inhibited growth, and they're like, "What's in here that's causing this bacteria not to want to grow here?" It's fascinating stuff. All right, lichens are the other things that we talked about, and these are symbiotic associations with algae or cyanobacteria. And that's kind of within their fungal hyphae or kind of hair-like structures. There's some hyphae. Many lichen associations are mutualistic, so they're getting along. Both partners are working together. The fungus receives food from its photosynthetic partner, so it gets some food, and then the fungus actually helps absorb and retain water and minerals that maybe its photosynthetic partner may not. Okay. Lichens are important pioneers on new land, and they often help form soil. They can withstand severe drought, but are sensitive to air pollution. This is how you know if you've got lichens on a tree, this is a good sign. If we don't, if the lichens die, it's often a sign that the air quality in the area is deteriorating, which honestly is what happened with the peppered moth thing, is that when the air quality got bad because of the Industrial Revolution, it killed all of these pretty green lichens on the trees and left those trees brown and bare. And that's when brown moths actually were able to survive better. It wasn't because soot covered the trees. Good Lord. I want to make sure that that's clear. Okay, so here's our kind of net of fungal hyphae, and it's around a little algal cell here. So they're associating together to make this work. All right, and that's what lichen looks like. And do remember that lichen is a little bit more flaky. So if you're not sure whether it's lichen or it's a bryophyte, lichens tend to be a little bit flakier, a little drier, and your bryophytes, our little mosses there will be fuzzier and kind of a little bit wetter. But scientists have proposed that symbioses with fungi were crucial to the colonization of plants by land by plants. So to test this hypothesis, they pursued 3 lines of evidence looking at present-day mycorrhizal relationships, fossils of early land plants, and some modern genetics. We don't have to know, but we'll look. The only major thing here is that 80% of all plant species establish symbioses with glomeromycetes, mycorrhizal fungi that form bushy structures called arbuscles in those root cells. So those are the ones that, if we turned it this way, it almost looked like they put a little tree in there. That's a glomeromycete. The presence of mycorrhizal associations in almost all major lineages of present-day plants suggests that ancient origin for plant-fungus symbiosis. So this has been going on a long time, and it works. Hasn't been selected against yet. All right. Of the 100,000 known species of fungi, about 30% of them are either parasites or pathogens in or on plants. About 80% of plant diseases caused by fungi. So between 10 and 50% of the world's fruit harvest is lost each year to fungal attack. A variety of fungi, including smuts and rust, infect grain crops, which kind of got us to that whole ergot thing. And so this one's a corn smut, so it's affecting the corn. Though in some countries they actually eat this. So I want to say it's like in the heart of Mexico, it's kind of a tradition to eat those. Like they'll make tacos and stuff out of them. I think I saw that on Bizarre Foods the other day. And then the other thing that we discussed is that we had some kind of issues with this fungi on grain and how it could potentially be a factor for also kind of causing problems for humans. Okay. And so Fascinating stuff. Only about 50 species of fungi are parasitic on animals. And fungal diseases of the skin include ringworm, so it's named that because it appears in these circular areas on the skin, but it is in fact a fungi. Athlete's foot is also caused by a ringworm fungus. Okay, vaginal yeast infections are from that. And then also there's some deadly lung diseases that produce this kind of tuberculosis-like symptoms in the lungs. So we don't have very many species of kind of parasitic fungi, but for the most part they're annoying until you get to some deadly lung disease stuff. Ugh. All right. So a relatively short lecture, and that's the way that we'll kind of do it, is we'll leave it at that. The other lecture you can start to read through. In fact, since we have a little extra time, it would be a benefit to at least look through it and see what we're going to talk about. So that way, when we're in class, we'll just go through it. We'll take our notes quickly. So we get the last section about plants. We'll discuss these things, make sure that we have our classifications down. Then whatever time we have, we can review and study just a little bit and ask some questions. So if anything's not clear, shoot me an email. Let's figure it out, and we'll keep working from there.